A man in a sharp business suit is behind the wheel of a luxurious black Audi. He appears calm and focused. Suddenly, a young curly-haired girl knocks on the window asking for help with changing a tire. The man refuses, but instead of driving away, she pulls out a gun and threatens him. The man exits the car and he's immediately surrounded by criminals. They eagerly jump into the luxurious Audi, but for some reason, the car doesn't start. A code needs to be entered, and the criminals demand that he give them the combination. He takes off his jacket and, in just a minute, deals with each of them. Confused, the girl drops the gun and obediently runs away. The man gets into the driver's seat, enters the code, and drives off the parking lot. The stunning Audi speeds through the streets of Miami and stops at the entrance of an elite school. A group of children rushes out of the building. One of them jumps into the back seat of the Audi. This is Jack Billings, and his personal driver, Frank, also known as the Transporter, is behind the wheel. Frank drives the boy to his luxurious home, complete with security guards and high iron gates. It seems that Jack's parents are very wealthy people. We see them arguing right at the doorstep. Jack's mother greets her son and complains to Frank about issues with her husband. Suddenly, we notice a hidden camera mounted on a tree near the house. Elsewhere, in a dark office, someone is watching the conversation and passing the information to a man with dreadlocks. In the next scene, a man in a white suit and mask fights off several enemies and defeats them. Everyone admires his skills. This man is likely a local authority figure, and the guy with dreadlocks approaches him. He informs him that Jack will be taken to the hospital the next morning. The man in white enters his room and takes out an ampule with bright green liquid from his suitcase. Clearly, it's some kind of virus or poison. Another ampule contains purple liquid. It's the antidote. From the news broadcast, we learn that Jack's father leads the Department for Combating Illegal Substances and is preparing for an important summit. Meanwhile, someone knocks on Frank's door. Jack's mother stands at the doorstep wearing a short skirt and smiling, trying to seduce him.
What are you doing?
Frank refuses her advances, but she hugs him, holding back tears. He walks her to the car and she drives off, feeling sad. The next morning, a luxurious Hummer pulls up to the hospital. Several men and a blonde in a pink coat exit the vehicle. A moment later, an Audi with Frank and Jack arrives. While their car parks, a group of criminals enters the hospital, demanding that the doctor be called immediately.
I need to see the doctor immediately.
The blonde pulls out a weapon and takes out a nurse, and when the doctor appears, he too gets shot. The criminals hide the bodies and take the white medical coats to disguise themselves. Meanwhile, Frank and Jack exit the car and head toward the doctor's office. They are greeted by the same blonde, who pretends to be a nurse. The boy is called into the office, but it turns out the doctor is actually a disguised villain. Jack is disappointed that his favorite doctor isn't there, and everything seems strange to Frank. Nevertheless, he decides to let the boy go into the office while continuing his conversation on the phone with a friend who has just arrived to visit. But soon, Frank notices that the nurse is wearing red high-heeled shoes, and she has a strange tattoo on her thigh. Also, the doctors are acting suspiciously, and red liquid starts to leak from the supply closet. Frank decides to act. He bursts into the doctor's office and immediately attacks the fake doctors, knocking the syringe from their hands. A fierce fight breaks out, and Frank literally breaks through the walls to defeat the villains. At one point, he is thrown into the hallway where the nurse is waiting for him. She rips off her coat and pulls out a weapon. Frank uses the broken door as a shield. Hiding in one of the rooms, he finds several devices and causes a small explosion in the hospital. Although in reality, it was an extremely big explosion. But the sadistic nurse is still alive and continues to run through the hospital, killing everyone in her path. Frank grabs Jack and carries him into one of the rooms. There, they try to escape through the ventilation system. Meanwhile, one of the villains attaches a bomb to the bottom of Frank's car. Frank and Jack jump into their Audi and race out of the hospital. Behind them, a blonde girl with a full arsenal of weapons is chasing them. She tries to shoot at their Audi, but fortunately the car is armored. The police arrive, but the blonde easily takes care of them. Meanwhile, Jack's parents are preparing a surprise party for his upcoming birthday. The Audi pulls up to the house. At that moment, Frank gets a call. On the other end of the line is Giovanni, the man in a white suit who fought while wearing a mask. He threatens Frank, saying he will take the child's life right in the car. Frank, horrified, sees a green dot from a sniper scope on Jack's forehead. Then the glass of the car is tapped by the blonde, ready to deliver the fatal blow. Frank opens the door and the girl gets into his Audi with a weapon in her hand. Realizing he has no choice, Frank starts the engine and drives off, leaving Jack's mother completely confused. Police cars chase after them, but Frank demonstrates incredible driving skills. The car speeds down the waterfront, barely missing pedestrians, and the police can't keep up. Then, they enter a massive parking lot, smashing into other vehicles, flying off the parking lot at a great height. But the situation doesn't get easier, as a police helicopter appears. However, the blonde easily shoots it down with her guns, and they continue their way. Jack's father, convinced that Frank is the kidnapper, sends even more police after him. Frank, with the blonde and Jack, reaches a small marina, where the boy is pulled out of the car. At that moment, the main villain, Giovanni, appears. He calls Jack's parents and demands a ransom of $5 million for their son. Giovanni decides to let Frank go alive, but to prove his intentions, he fires a warning shot into the ground. Frank gets into his Audi and notices in the puddle the reflection of the lower part of the car. A bomb is attached to it, ready to explode. Without wasting time, he speeds up toward the dock, maneuvers sharply, and flips the car in midair. In the final moment, the crane's hook knocks the bomb off, saving everyone just a second before it explodes. Frank calls Jack's father, assuring him that he is not the kidnapper, but just an accidental witness. But the man doesn't believe his words. The transporter leaves his phone and drives off to get as far away from the crime scene as possible. Using a second phone, Frank calls his friend, a French police inspector, who is currently making himself at home in Frank's house. Frank asks him to leave the apartment as soon as possible, but the inspector doesn't manage to escape in time and ends up in the hands of the police. The inspector turns out to be not only an experienced policeman, but also a professional chef. He gives the cops a real cooking masterclass until he gets a call from Frank asking for help. Frank needs to find out the identity of one of the criminals, and the inspector finds the necessary information in the database. After the conversation, Frank sneaks into the hospital where they were attacked the first time and finds a syringe with bright liquid on the floor in the doctor's office.
Don't move.
At that moment, armed men appear and a scuffle ensues. The syringe gets broken, and Frank, frustrated, leaves the hospital, taking another syringe filled with plain water. He heads to one of the criminal's apartments where the man is packing up. Frank catches up with him, but the criminal tries to use a weapon. The man escapes by the fire escape, but Frank doesn't back down and continues chasing him. Together, they crash into an entertainment center, leaving destruction in their wake. The villain manages to escape and grabs onto a bus, but Frank is determined not to stop. To catch the criminal, he hijacks a boat with a pretty girl aboard and races through the water. The boat ends up on the road, and through his maneuvers, Frank manages to catch the villain. The transporter injects the criminal with the contents of the syringe. Although we know the syringe only contains water, Frank claims it's a deadly virus he took from the hospital. The Billings family, after paying the ransom, get their son back, but it turns out he was locked in a flower van. However, no one knows that Jack is infected with a deadly virus that kills anyone who comes in contact with him within 24 hours. The criminal whom Frank injected panics and tries to reach a secret lab to get the antidote. The transporter secretly follows him and discovers several chambers with sick people surrounded by timers counting down. It looks like they don't have much time left. Suddenly, Frank is attacked by a man with dreadlocks. He throws Frank out of the window and jumps after him, ripping Frank's shirt and throwing him onto a table before beating him with a stick. However, our hero finds the strength not only to stay on his feet, but also to fight back. Meanwhile, the criminal Frank injected demands the antidote from his colleagues, threatening them with a weapon. The doctor opens the refrigerator, revealing 2 ampules with the antidote. Frank appears, takes the criminal's life, and demands the ampules as well as the secret of the virus. The doctor admits that the virus kills the immune system and Jack will die, as well as anyone who comes into contact with him within 24 hours. The sly doctor throws the ampules with the antidote out the window, and Frank jumps after them. Unfortunately, he manages to save only 1 ampule, the second one breaks. The transporter removes his torn clothes and puts on a new suit. Meanwhile, it becomes clear that Jack is infected with the virus, and his parents are beginning to show symptoms as well. Despite this, Jack's father heads to meet with the head of the organization fighting illegal substances. Frank sneaks into the Billings house, finds Jack's mother, and gives her the medication for the boy. But the mother and father are also infected, and now our hero is a carrier of the virus as well. Police arrive at the house and attempt to arrest Frank, but he manages to escape. After a while, Jack's mother loses consciousness, and his father also feels unwell and is urgently taken to the hospital. The transporter realizes that Jack was kidnapped to infect his father with the virus, who was then supposed to infect everyone at the important meeting. It was a perfect way to get rid of everyone who was interfering with the criminal business. Meanwhile, a press conference begins, and Giovanni and the blonde rejoice that tomorrow they will be making millions by selling illegal substances. Frank arrives at Gianni's house by taxi and secretly sneaks into the garage. There, he engages in hand-to-hand combat with the criminals, easily dealing with a whole gang of villains, first in the garage, then on the staircase. He fights his way inside, determined to get to Gianni himself. However, as soon as Frank comes face-to-face with the gang leader, Gianni injects himself with all the remaining antidote and decides to escape. He leaves Frank to deal with his ruthless blonde girlfriend. A fierce battle ensues between them. The villainess shows incredible brutality, but in the end, she dies. Frank takes Gianni's Lamborghini and races to the airport. He manages to jump onto the villain's plane as it starts to take off. Unfortunately, the luxurious car explodes, leaving Frank without transport. However, he doesn't waste any time, and after taking out one of the pilots, he continues fighting Gianni. In a fit of rage, Gianni shoots and accidentally hits the second pilot, causing the plane to crash into the ocean. The battle between Frank and Gianni doesn't stop even during the fall. However, Frank manages to knock Gianni out and get him to the surface, where the police are already waiting for them. Later, Frank visits Jack's family in the hospital. The doctors were able to recreate the medicine from Gianni's blood, and now they are all healthy and happy. Frank sees Jack, his parents, and the doctor smiling, no longer thinking about the virus. After sending his friend, the inspector, home, Frank receives a call. Someone on the other end says, "I need the transporter. It seems that new assignments are ahead for him."